Hi, everybody, and welcome back to this, our seventh week of consumer market research. We covered two chapters this week. The first is about self-administered interviews, and the second is about the in-person interview. One point that I want to make is that the book treats the traditional paper and pencil interview as the type of self-administered interview. We all encounter them from time to time when we go to a restaurant. They ask for us to finish a customer satisfaction survey, or if we stay at a hotel. And they'll continue to appear in that format, but it's becoming more and more rare. My company hardly ever mails out surveys the way it's described in the book. A more common and more important type of self-administered interview we're going to cover next week, and that's the online interview. With technology and the proliferation of online panels, much more and more and more of the market research world is being completed online via online panels. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the paper and paper interview. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that it's becoming, to a certain extent, obsolete. In the old days, you'd get surveys in the mail all the time. J.D. Power, that rates automobiles for years and years, had a paper and pencil survey. I'm not even sure if they still do anymore. But again, it's going by the wayside with technology. One thing I'd like you to keep in mind is the book makes it equates self-administered interview with a paper and pencil interview. I would like to make another distinction, which I found to be much more important, and that is the self-administered interview versus the administrator administered interview, or the interviewer administered interview, because there are certain dangers when you combine one of those types with the other type. And give me a minute or two, and I'll explain to you what I mean. With a self-administered interview, that could be paper and pencil, or it could be online. You're literally checking boxes by yourself, and you're kind of on your own as you're filling it out. With an administrator-administered interview, you've got somebody there asking you questions in the flesh, and they may be probing for results. So, for instance, if I'm asking you to tell me unaided what brands of automobiles you think of, I'm not going to prompt you and say, have you ever heard of Honda or Toyota? What brands of automobiles have you heard of? You might just write down one or two if you're doing a self-completed interview. Whereas if there's an interviewer there, they might be prompting you, saying, wow, that's great. Can you think of anything else? Anything else? Anything else? So you might come up with a longer list. So there's a certain bias there, for instance, that the list of automobiles that people are aware of might be longer. We will oftentimes do a hybrid approach, whereby we will do a certain amount of interviews online because it's very cost effective, and then we might do a certain amount in person, but using an iPad, whereby people are still completing the interview by themselves. Okay? So I want to get into the in-person interview, because in some cases it might be self-completed, as in the case I just described, and other cases it might be with an interviewer asking questions. There are definite advantages, and I don't see that as falling by the wayside, particularly when you do what I do, which is multicultural market research. For example, we found that Hispanic recent immigrants are not that well represented in a whole lot of online panels. And yet it's very cost effective to do an online panel. So we will go into Hispanic neighborhoods, or we will go into African American neighborhoods and intercept people to make sure that represented in our sample are people that might not be found in an online panel, because that represents a pretty significant bias. They're very, very useful. The intercept interview, as I like to call them, when you're doing, for instance, a shopper study. Let's say I want to interview people that shop at a certain store. We're working on a survey right now whereby we're going to one of the big malls in Los Angeles and we want to talk to shoppers. Well, there's no more efficient way than to go to the mall and intercept people on the premises and ask what they think of it. And in fact, those are going to be administered interviews or interviewer administrated interviews. Okay. Now, another technique that the book described is the CLT interview, or the central location testing interview, which oftentimes involves a pre-recruit. We'll sometimes do it by phone, and we'll contact people and say we're conducting interviews, let's say downtown. It's going to be a 40-minute interview. Would you be interested in participating? These are really good, for instance, if you want to do taste testing, or if you want to test advertising concepts. You might do this in cases where it's very important that the person see something live. Now, you can do advertising testing on the internet. You can show people video clips and stuff like that, but you certainly can't do a taste test over the internet, right? So the CLT is a very common type of interview, or the central location testing, or the recruit to a central location kind of interview is very common, particularly if the interview is going to be longer. Now, the book also talks about mall intercepts, which are, as it mentions, common in the States, and many of you might have been accosted by interviewers while shopping in a shopping mall, and they may, do the interview right there, or they may take you into a facility which sometimes is housed within the mall. That's an efficient way of doing things too, but, when you're shopping, you probably get your arms full of groceries or bags or something like that. You probably don't have a lot of time, nor do you probably have a lot of interest in doing a lengthy survey. So that type of format is very good for when it's a shorter interview. I think the book says 10 minutes. We get away with 15, 20 minutes. I think the key when you're doing longer interviews is to pay an incentive. And pay a decent enough incentive that people are engaged. In-person interviewing is also good in the multicultural arena, like where I work, and in different countries where personal contact is more important. For instance, when we're dealing with, again, Hispanic immigrants, they may be unfamiliar with what market research is all about. They might answer the phone and it's a market researcher, and they may be less willing to participate, whereas the face-to-face contact of an in-person interview is helpful. And the interviewer can do a certain amount of persuasion in the sense of assuring the person that everything is confidential, giving them a little bit of background about what the study is about.